The Death Star, the primary weapon of the Empire, and their ultimate prize as they entered the age of galactic domination. The Sith had finally won the generations-long war between the light side counterparts, and this was the trophy that they built to prove it. It is unknown for how long this weapon was a part of the grand plan, but it can be inferred that a few sources from Palpatine had been planning the construction of the superweapon for most of his life. It was his crown jewel in many respects. Each Sith Lord had their own ideas as to how the ultimate demise of the Jedi would come about. Darth Tenebris assumed that he would create a technology that would render the Force itself obsolete in the hands of a Jedi. Plagueis planned to become so powerful that his influence over life itself that he would be unchallenged by any other Force wielder. Sidious, though, had a different plan, one far more effective that he would conceive with his master before usurping him and carrying out their plan himself. Curiously though, the Death Star itself was an end and not a means. The means of destroying the Jedi was Order 66, all to establish the Empire and construct the Death Star to begin with. But why? With an overwhelming military force, Palpatine had his hold on the galaxy, but he was hellbent on making sure that the Death Star still came about. Why was he so obsessed with it? And could he have actually been trying to protect the Star Wars galaxy? Well, Acolytes, welcome back to the archives, and strap yourselves in as we take a deep look into a theory of not only why the Death Star was so important to Sidious, but to all of the Sith. Sidious had the plans of the Death Star from the very beginning. We know that the Death Star was something he conceived of at some point in the early days before the Clone War. As in Attack of the Clones, we see Dooku with a holographic display of the Death Star blueprint right before his escape from Geonosis. One might say that Palpatine wanted to make sure that he had the galaxy at gunpoint, but he had already done that. The Death Star wasn't a response to the rising rebel threat. He had begun construction almost immediately after the Empire had been formed, and no rebels were to be found. We know this because at the very end of Revenge of the Sith, a newly suited Lord Vader joins a newly robed Emperor and Grand Moff Tarkin aboard a Star Destroyer, looking out of the viewport at the early construction of the Death Star's hull. It is clear that Palpatine didn't need the Death Star to have control of the galaxy. He had a massive, highly advanced clone army at his disposal, a clone army that he would do away with, in part to fund the Death Star itself so that he could invest more into his dream project. Grand Admiral Thrawn was of the opinion that the Death Star was a needless waste of Imperial resources and a useless endeavor against the Rebel Alliance. It was of Thrawn's opinion that a mobile task force of stormtroopers or other special forces of Imperial troops would be far more effective at crushing the rebellion, as they would be mobile enough to keep up with the rebels, who were masters at evasive hit and run techniques. Thrawn wanted to use guerrilla warfare to fight against guerrilla warfare. We know that Palpatine highly valued Thrawn's insights and opinions. Ever since Thrawn was brought before him, the Emperor was extremely invested in his career, despite the Emperor's prejudice against alien races. The Emperor endorsed Thrawn at every single turn, having him promoted to lieutenant while he was still in the Imperial Academy. The Grand Admiral gave many important insights into the Empire, and was even respected by Lord Vader. However, Palpatine would quickly dismiss his advice and continue with the project of the Death Star. So why is this? The answer is better than you may think. The Yuuzhan Vong. For those of you who have not read the extended universe novels, the Yuuzhan Vong are a warrior race that arrives from a galaxy far outside the one that we know in Star Wars. They invade the galaxy whenever the New Republic has been established, and Lucas began training his own children in the ways of the Force. The Vong nearly destroyed the New Republic and were responsible for the deaths of nearly 300 trillion beings during their invasion. A typical Vong resembled a human in form, though they were taller and heavier than the average human and had less hair on their heads. They were religious zealots who viewed mechanical technology as blasphemy. Their technological innovations were genetically engineered and purely organic. All Yuuzhan Vong technology, whether it be starships, weapons, or simple everyday objects, were entirely biological. They hated droids, machines, electronics, and anything manufactured. This biotechnology was coaxed into growth by the Shapers, and seemed to be more resilient when compared to conventional technology and weapons. The Vong's weaponry, including living serpentine weapons called amphistaffs that were able to alter their form, allowing the user to use them as a spear or a whip. Next, their armor. which was capable of protecting them from weapon fire and even well-placed lightsaber blows. Their large, coral-shaped craft made use of plasma weapons that ate through the hull of enemy ships, while shielding was provided by the gravity manipulation. Their ships were nearly impenetrable. Shields generated singularities that were used to protect the craft from enemy weapon fire, and were capable of stripping the shields of enemy vessels. Their weapons were even strong enough to melt Mandalorian armor or Beskar. This was when they first made contact with the Mandalorians, sometime before Exar Kun's rise to power when they first arrived to the known universe. But things only get worse, as they were extremely deadly against Jedi, as they could not be sensed through the Force. This confounded the Jedi who first encountered the Vong. However, they were susceptible to some Force-based attacks. They are a powerful warrior race, and a force to be reckoned with. In the expanded universe, they would be responsible for the death of even Chewbacca. To put it simply, the Vong were no joke, and the Sith might have known about them. We believe that in Legends, a Sith Lord had a vision or even encountered the Vong, and knew they were going to invade the known galaxy, which is why the Sith had been trying so hard to defeat the Jedi and take over. Not just for power's sake, but because they believe they are the only ones who can defend the galaxy from this greater evil. The Sith believed that only the dark side was powerful enough to stop these far outsiders from destroying all those lives, a galaxy left in ruin. This now answers why they only seek powerful apprentices, and only respect those of which who are the strongest. This would add a deep layer of relatability and understanding of the Sith. It is harder to imagine why someone would not only want power for power's sake. Contrary to popular belief, the Sith want to protect the galaxy as much as the Jedi do. They just believe that the Jedi are far too weak and ignorant, and that the galaxy is the Sith's to rule by birthright. We know thanks to legend sources that Palpatine knew of the Yuzhong Vong before the Clone Wars, as well as Thrawn. This is explored in the Thrawn novel The Outbound Flight, and it is known that by 27 BBY, at the start of the Outbound Flight project, Palpatine had somehow gained knowledge of the incoming Yuzhong Vong fleet, though he planned to withhold it from the Republic until after his new order and empire could be instituted. At least one of Palpatine's advisors, Kinmon Doriana, was informed, however, that the distant threat of invasion was also part of the reason why Palpatine ordered the destruction of Outbound Flight, in order to prevent its occupants from falling into the hands of the Yuzhong Vong. But things get worse. After the end of the Clone Wars, Palpatine even hints to the wider public about an incoming invasion, stating that this was one of the main reasons why he needed to keep the Imperial Navy active even after the Clone Wars ended, in order to ward off this threat of invasion. This now brings things full circle. We believe Emperor Palpatine in Legends created the Death Star as a way to counter this powerful invasion force. What better way to combat them foreign technology than with a giant superweapon of technological unprecedents? The kryptonite to the Vong. Planet destruction was not the Death Star's intended purpose, but more of a byproduct of how powerful it needed to be. The Sith always had an affinity for superweapons, starting with Revan's Starforge and the Mass Shadow Generator, and moving on to the Dark Reaper, which was being pursued by Darth Malgus. While yes, there were powerful dark side rituals such as the Thought Bomb, perhaps Palpatine wanted to use technology that would be much more reliable and more controlled, especially since the Vong were force resistant. So anyway, my friends and acolytes, what are your thoughts on this? And do you believe that Palpatine constructed the Death Star to protect the Star Wars galaxy? As Sidious once said, he does not wish to rule over a galaxy of the dead. But before we close today's holocron, we'd like to talk about some of the monthly deals offered by Own a Saber. While some knights must train for years before they can craft a quality saber, Own a Saber has gotten this process down to a science. Their sabers are among the highest quality in the entire galaxy, and for the month of July, they are offering 30% off with free shipping on your order. You can also use our code STUPENDOUS to get an additional $15 off your custom engraved saber. If you order from the Wrathbearer set, you can get a custom word or phrase engraved on the hilt up to 10 words long. Thank you all so much for your support and allowing us to bring content to you guys. Thank you again not only to Own a Saber, but you as an audience for being so incredibly supportive to us and our adventures. May the Force be with you, and have a great day.